What happens when an innocent 23-year-old virgin marries a cold, distant billionaire twice her age? When Emily walked down that aisle, she had no idea she was about to enter a world of luxury, betrayal, and a love so intense it would change everything. This is not just another romance. This is the story of two broken souls finding healing in the most unexpected way. But before we dive into this emotional roller coaster, I want to know where you're watching this from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story that will make you believe in love again, smash that subscribe button and hit the like. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's begin. The grandfather clock in the Hampton suite struck midnight. Its haunting chimes echoed through the opulent room like a countdown to destiny. Emily Sterling. The name still felt foreign on her tongue, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silk nightgown flowing like liquid moonlight against her trembling frame. The Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly before her, its waves crashing against the shore with the same rhythm as her racing heart. "You're shaking," came a deep voice from behind her, cold and distant as winter frost. She turned slowly to face her new husband, Richard Sterling, a man whose steel-gray eyes held secrets darker than the ocean depths. At 42, he commanded empires with a single word. Yet tonight he seemed as hesitant as she felt. His white shirt hung open, revealing a chest that spoke of careful maintenance rather than vanity. Everything about him was calculated, controlled. Emily's voice caught in her throat, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The words hung between them like a confession. Richard's expression softened for just a moment, so brief she might have imagined it. "I know," he said, approaching her with the careful grace of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Your father made that abundantly clear during our negotiations." The word negotiations hit her like ice water. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a business transaction. She was 23, virginal, and desperate to save her family from financial ruin. He was a billionaire who needed her as the appropriate wife for social functions. The mathematics were simple, brutal, and absolutely terrifying. "Are you going to hurt me?" The question escaped before she could stop it, vulnerability bleeding through her carefully constructed composure. Something flickered across Richard's face. Surprise, perhaps even tenderness. He reached out, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. "No, Emily, never intentionally." As he drew closer, she caught his scent. Expensive cologne mixed with something indefinably masculine. When his lips finally met hers, they were surprisingly gentle, patient, but behind his controlled exterior, she sensed a storm barely contained, a passion he fought to keep leashed. What Emily couldn't know was that as Richard held her, he was battling his own demons. The memory of another woman who had shared his bed and sold his secrets, who had taught him that love was just another form of warfare. But as dawn broke over the Hamptons that morning, neither of them could have predicted how completely their carefully constructed arrangement would shatter, or how beautifully they would rebuild it together. The wedding night was over, but their real story was just beginning. 3 days had passed since their wedding night, and Emily felt like she was living with a stranger. The warm, patient man who had held her so tenderly had vanished, replaced by someone who treated her like an expensive piece of furniture, beautiful to display, but never truly engaged with. Richard spent his mornings in his study overlooking the ocean, surrounded by papers and phone calls that seemed to consume every moment of his attention. The mahogany-paneled room might as well have been a fortress, its doors firmly closed to her world. "Good morning," Emily ventured, balancing a breakfast tray as she entered his sanctuary. She'd learned to knock and wait for permission, a lesson taught through his cool glances rather than words. He didn't look up from his laptop screen. "Leave it on the side table." The dismissal stung more than a slap. Emily sat down the tray with hands that betrayed her hurt through their slight tremor. "I thought perhaps we could have breakfast together on the terrace. The morning light on the water I'm busy." His voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. She stood there for a moment, watching his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair caught the morning light, the small scar above his left eyebrow that spoke of some long-ago story he'd never share. Everything about him fascinated and frustrated her in equal measure. "Richard, I don't understand what I've done wrong." Finally, he looked at her, and she saw something flash in those gray eyes. Pain, perhaps, or fear disguised as indifference. "You've done nothing wrong." "This is simply how things are." "How things are?" Emily's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "We're married. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. At 6'3", he towered over her petite frame, but instead of intimidating her, his height only emphasized how alone he seemed. It means you have my name, my protection, and access to anything money can buy. Most women would find that sufficient. The cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. I'm not most women. No, he said quietly, his gaze traveling over her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. You're not. For a moment, the ice between them seemed to crack. She thought he might reach for her, might explain the walls he'd built so carefully around himself. Instead, he moved to the window, presenting her with his broad shoulders and rigid spine. I have calls to make. Please close the door on your way out. Emily left the study feeling smaller than when she'd entered. But as she walked down the hallway lined with sterling family portraits, she made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't give up on the man she'd glimpsed on their wedding night, the one hiding behind all that careful control. If Richard Sterling thought he could freeze her out, he was about to discover just how stubborn Emily Morrison Sterling could be. That afternoon, Emily found herself walking alone along the private beach that stretched behind the Sterling estate. The sand was warm between her toes, and the salt breeze lifted her honey-colored hair like fingers running through silk. She traded her designer clothes for a simple white sundress that made her look younger than her 23 years. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a shadow fell across her path. You shouldn't be out here alone. Richard's voice carried a note of concern that surprised them both. Emily turned, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun. He'd changed from his business attire into khakis and a navy polo shirt that somehow made him look less intimidating and infinitely more attractive. I needed air, she said simply. The house feels like a beautiful prison sometimes. Something shifted in his expression. I didn't mean for you to feel that way. They walked in silence for several minutes. The only sounds were the rhythmic crash of waves and the cry of gulls overhead. Emily stole glances at her husband's profile, wondering what thoughts moved behind those carefully guarded eyes. Tell me about her, she said suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness. Richard stopped walking. What? The woman who hurt you? The reason you can barely stand to look at me sometimes. His jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle tick beneath his skin. That's not something I discuss. Maybe it should be. Emily moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. We're strangers living in the same house, Richard. How is that supposed to work? For a long moment, he stared at her as if weighing some internal debate. Then slowly he began to speak. Her name was Victoria. We were married for 8 years. His voice was carefully controlled, but Emily heard the pain underneath. I thought she loved me. I believed every word, every touch, every promise. It took me 6 years to discover that she was selling information about my business deals to my competitors, using our intimacy to extract what she needed. Emily felt her heart break a little for the younger version of this man, the one who'd trusted completely and been destroyed for it. She played her part perfectly, he continued, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The devoted wife, the passionate lover, all of it calculated, all of it fake. When I finally had proof, she didn't even bother to deny it. She just laughed and said I should thank her for teaching me how the world really works. Richard. Emily reached out instinctively, but he stepped back. Don't. His voice was sharp with old wounds. I won't be anyone's fool again. This marriage is what it is, a practical arrangement that benefits us both. Expecting more is just setting us both up for disappointment. The hurt in Emily's chest bloomed into something stronger, determination. I'm not her. You're all women until proven otherwise. The words hung between them like a challenge. Emily felt her temper flare, but with it came clarity. This wasn't about her at all. It was about a man so wounded he couldn't see past his own scars. Then I guess I'll have to prove otherwise, she said quietly. As they walked back toward the house in silence, neither of them noticed the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, both literal and metaphorical. The past had revealed itself, but the future remained unwritten. The storm arrived that night with a vengeance, rattling the windows of the mansion and bringing with it the promise of change. The Hampton estate loomed like an angry giant demanding entry. Emily lay in her separate bedroom. They had maintained the pretense of a proper marriage for the staff, but slept apart, listening to the thunder roll across the Atlantic with increasing intensity. She'd chosen a book from Richard's extensive library earlier, hoping to distract herself from the growing tension in the house. But the words on the page might as well have been hieroglyphics, for all the sense they made. Her mind kept replaying their conversation on the beach, the raw pain in his voice when he'd spoken about Victoria. Lightning illuminated her room in stark white flashes, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. During one particularly violent crack, the lights flickered and died, plunging the estate into darkness. Emily fumbled for her phone's flashlight, her heart racing. She'd never liked storms, not since she was a child, when a tornado had torn through her hometown. But this felt different, wilder, more dangerous. A soft knock at her door made her jump. Emily. Richard's voice carried through the wood, and she heard something in it she'd never heard before. Genuine concern. "Come in," she called, pulling her silk robe tighter around herself. The door opened to reveal Richard silhouetted against the hallway, a flashlight in one hand. Even in the darkness, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man preparing for battle. "The power's out," he said unnecessarily. "The backup generator should kick in soon." But another tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, and Emily couldn't suppress a small cry of fear. In an instant, Richard was across the room, his strong hands grasping her shoulders. "Hey," his voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. "It's just a storm." "I know," she whispered, but her body betrayed her with trembling she couldn't control. "I've just never liked them." In the darkness, with rain lashing against the windows and thunder providing a primal soundtrack, something fundamental shifted between them. Richard's thumbs traced small circles on her shoulders, and she could feel his body heat through the thin silk of her nightgown. "When I was 12, he said quietly, "we had a hurricane that lasted 3 days. I spent most of it in the wine cellar with my mother, listening to her tell stories to keep me from being afraid." The intimacy of his confession broke something open inside Emily's chest. Here was the man from their wedding night again. Vulnerable, human, real. "What kind of stories?" she whispered. "Old fairy tales mostly, but she changed them, made the princes more human, the princesses stronger." His voice dropped lower, and she felt rather than saw him lean closer. "She always said the best stories were about people who saved each other." Emily's breath caught as she felt his fingers trace the line of her jaw. "Richard, I've been trying so hard not to want you," he confessed, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Trying to keep you at a distance because wanting someone again terrifies me more than losing everything I own."
"You don't have to be afraid of me," Emily breathed, her hand finding his chest, feeling his heartbeat wild and strong beneath her palm.
The storm raged outside, but inside that darkened room, two souls finally began to recognize each other. When Richard's lips found hers, it wasn't the controlled kiss of their wedding night. It was desperate, hungry, full of all the longing he'd been fighting to suppress. "Emily," he whispered against her mouth, and her name sounded like a prayer. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one they were about to weather together. Emily woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows and the sound of her husband moving quietly around the room. She lay still for a moment, letting the memories of the night wash over her like warm honey. The storm had passed, taking with it the last barriers between them. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, already dressed for the day, his dark hair still damp from his shower. When he noticed her watching him, his expression grew tender, a look so different from his usual careful control that it took her breath away. "Good morning," he said softly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Good morning." Emily's voice came out husky from sleep and emotion. "Are you going to your study again?" "No," he said, and the single word carried the weight of a promise. "I thought perhaps you'd like to have breakfast on the terrace. You mentioned yesterday that you liked the morning light on the water." The gesture was small, but Emily recognized it for what it was, an olive branch, an admission that things had changed between them. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the Atlantic stretching endlessly before them. Richard had shed his usual armor of expensive suits for casual khakis and a white linen shirt that made him look younger, more approachable. Every few minutes, Emily caught him watching her with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I need to tell you something," he said eventually, setting down his coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady. Emily felt her stomach clench. "What is it?" "Last night, when I found out the truth about you," he paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Emily, you were a virgin." Heat flooded her cheeks. "You said my father had made that clear during your negotiations." "He had," Richard said quietly, "but I didn't believe him. I thought it was another lie, another performance designed to increase your value in the arrangement." His gray eyes met hers, and she saw shame there and something deeper. and I've spent so long assuming the worst about people's motives that I couldn't accept the possibility that you might be exactly who you appeared to be. Emily reached across the small table, covering his hand with hers. I'm not performing, Richard. This isn't an act. I'm beginning to understand that. He turned his palm up, intertwining their fingers. And it terrifies me. Why? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because it means I have something to lose again. Something precious and real and completely outside my control. The vulnerability in his admission made Emily's heart ache. She thought about all the walls he'd built, all the careful defenses that had kept him safe but alone. Love isn't about control, she said gently. It's about trust. I don't know how to do that anymore. Then learn with me. Emily brought his hand to her lips, pressing a soft kiss to his palm. We have time. Richard studied her face as if memorizing every feature.
You're not what I expected when I agreed to this marriage.
What did you expect? Someone more like he trailed off, but Emily understood. Like Victoria? Yes, someone who wanted my money, my status, my connections. Someone who would play the part of Mrs. Richard Sterling in public and live her own life in private. He shook his head slowly. Instead, I got you. Is that a bad thing? Richard lifted their joined hands, studying their intertwined fingers. It's the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to me, he said finally. And I'm starting to think it might also be the most necessary. As the morning sun climbed higher over the Atlantic, two hearts that had been guarding themselves began to open, neither knowing that their greatest test still lay ahead. The weeks that followed transformed the Hampton estate from a beautiful prison into something resembling a home. Emily discovered that beneath Richard's controlled exterior lay a man of surprising depth, well-read, thoughtful, capable of conversations that lasted long into the night as they walked the moonlit beach together. Tell me about your childhood, she said one evening as they sat on the terrace, sharing a bottle of wine while the stars emerged one by one above the ocean. Richard's fingers played absently with her hair, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Privileged but cold. My father built Sterling Industries from nothing, but it consumed him. My mother tried to bridge the gap between his world and mine, but she died when I was 16. I'm sorry, Emily said softly, turning in his arms, studying his profile in the candlelight. Is that why you work so much? To honor his legacy? I used to think so. His gray eyes softened. Found hers, and she saw honesty there that took her breath away. Now I think it was just easier to lose myself in work than to risk feeling anything real, and now Richard's smile was soft, almost shy. Now I find myself leaving the office at 5 so I can have dinner with my wife. Now I cancel evening meetings because I'd rather read to you in the library. Now I'm discovering that the most important business of my day is asking how yours was. Emily felt her heart expand with love so sudden and complete, it almost frightened her. Richard, I know it's too soon to say certain words, he said quietly, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. But Emily, what I feel for you, it's nothing like what I felt before. It's not desperate or consuming or painful. It's peaceful, like coming home. Before she could respond, he kissed her, and she tasted wine and promise and the beginning of something beautiful. 3 weeks later, Emily stood in the marble bathroom of their New York penthouse. They'd returned to the city so Richard could attend to business, staring at a small plastic stick that held the power to change everything. 2 pink lines. Her hands shook as she set the pregnancy test on the counter, her mind racing through possibilities and fears. They'd been careless in their newfound passion, swept away by the intensity of their connection. Now she had to face the consequences. What would Richard think? Would he assume she'd planned this? That she was trying to trap him like some gold-digging stereotype? The bathroom door opened, and Richard appeared in the mirror behind her, his hair mussed from sleep, wearing only pajama pants that hung low on his hips. Good morning, beautiful, he murmured, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Then his gaze fell to the counter, to the test lying there like evidence of their passion. The color drained from his face. Emily. His voice was carefully controlled, but she heard the undercurrent of shock. Is that positive? The word came out as barely a whisper. Richard, I swear I didn't plan this. I never meant for it to happen so soon. I know how it looks, but... He turned her in his arms, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. Hey, stop. Tears she hadn't realized were falling streaked down her cheeks. You think I did this on purpose? You think I'm just like her? No. His voice was firm, certain. No, Emily, I don't think that. Not for a second. But your face when you saw... Shock, he said simply. Not suspicion, not doubt, just shock. His thumbs wiped away her tears with careful tenderness. We're going to have a baby. The wonder in his voice made her knees weak. You're not angry? Angry? Richard laughed, and the sound was pure joy. How could I be anything but grateful? As Richard pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the bathroom while she laughed through her tears, neither of them could have predicted how soon their happiness would be tested by the judgment of others. The charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum was the kind of event Emily had only read about in magazines. Women draped in designer gowns worth more than most people's houses, men whose net worth could fund small countries, all gathered under the soaring ceilings and priceless art to raise money for causes they discussed over champagne and caviar. Emily, you've just told me that the woman I'm falling in love with is carrying my child. Emily smoothed her hands over the midnight blue Valentino gown Richard had insisted on buying her, the silk clinging to her still flat stomach where their 3-month secret grew. She'd learned to move in heels that cost more than her family's monthly grocery budget, to make small talk about topics she'd never considered, to smile graciously when people made comments that bordered on insulting. Mrs. Sterling, the voice belonged to Vivian Ashworth, a woman whose husband owned half of Park Avenue and whose smile could freeze champagne mid-pour. How lovely to see you again and how radiant you look tonight. The pause before radiant was loaded with implication. Emily felt Richard's hand tighten protectively on her waist, but she smiled serenely. Thank you, Mrs. Ashworth. You look wonderful as well. Oh, please call me Vivian. After all, we're practically neighbors now. Vivian's laugh was like crystal breaking, though I must say married life seems to agree with you remarkably quickly. The comment hung in the air like smoke, innocent on the surface but toxic underneath. Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. But before she could respond, another voice joined the conversation. Vivian's right, purred Constance Melbourne, whose family tree included 2 senators and a Supreme Court justice. You do have that special glow. How long has it been since the wedding? 3 months. 4, Emily corrected quietly. Oh, of course. Time flies when you're adjusting to married life. Constance's smile was razor sharp. And speaking of adjustments, I imagine it must be quite different from your previous uncircumstances. Connecticut farm life versus Manhattan society. Emily felt the familiar sting of class warfare disguised as polite conversation. These women had perfected the art of verbal evisceration while maintaining perfect smiles and impeccable manners. Emily's background brings a refreshing perspective to our social circle, came Richard's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, but with an edge that made both women straighten unconsciously. Intelligence and authenticity are so rare in our world, don't you think? Of course, Vivian backtracked quickly, but her eyes glittered with malice. Though I do hope you're not rushing into anything too permanent. These whirlwind romances can lead to such hasty decisions. The implication was clear. They suspected the pregnancy, and they assumed it was calculated. Emily felt her composure crack slightly, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. I think, Richard said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had built empires, that my wife and I are quite capable of managing our personal life without input from the peanut gallery. The term peanut gallery dropped like a bomb into the refined conversation. Both women's faces went white with shock at being so publicly diminished by one of the most powerful men in their social circle. Richard, Vivian sputtered. We were simply gossiping, he finished, about my wife. In front of my wife, which makes it not gossip, but direct insult. He stepped closer to the women, and despite his civilized appearance, something predatory flickered in his gray eyes. I'd be very careful about continuing down that particular path, ladies. I have an excellent memory and a very long reach. The threat was delivered so smoothly it might have been a compliment to anyone not listening carefully. But Vivian and Constance understood perfectly. Cross Emily Sterling and you cross her husband, and crossing Richard Sterling was a luxury their husbands' businesses couldn't afford. As the women melted away into the crowd with murmured apologies, Richard turned to Emily, his expression softening instantly. Are you all right? Emily looked up at the man who had just defended her honor with the casual efficiency of a medieval knight and felt love bloom so suddenly and completely in her chest that it stole her breath. I love you, she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Richard went very still, his gray eyes searching her face. Emily, I know it's too soon to say it, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I know this all happened fast and maybe we're both still figuring it out, but I love you, Richard Sterling. Not your money, not your status, not what you can give me. You. For a moment, she thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Then Richard's face broke into a smile so radiant it transformed him completely. I love you too, he said simply, as if the words had been waiting his entire life to be spoken. God help me, Emily. I love you more than I ever thought possible. As they stood in the middle of New York's social elite, declaring their love like teenagers at prom, neither of them noticed Vivian Ashworth watching from across the room. Her expression promising that this battle was far from over. The news of Emily's pregnancy, when they finally announced it publicly 6 weeks later, sent ripples through New York society that reached them, even in the sanctuary of their penthouse. The reactions ranged from genuine congratulations to thinly veiled speculation about timing and motives. But Emily found she cared less and less what people thought as she watched Richard transform into an expectant father. We need to start thinking about the nursery, he said one morning over breakfast. His tablet opened to a website featuring cribs that cost more than most people's cars. And we should probably look at the house in Westchester. The penthouse is wonderful, but a child needs space to run, gardens to explore. Emily smiled over her herbal tea. Coffee had become unbearable since her morning sickness began. Slow down. We have 6 months. 5 months and 2 weeks, Richard corrected, and Emily realized he'd been counting. I want everything to be perfect for him. Or her, he added quickly. Do you have a preference? Richard set down his tablet, reaching across the table to take her hand. Healthy. That's all I want. Healthy and happy and nothing like me at that age. What were you like as a child? Serious, anxious, desperate for my father's approval. Richard's thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture that had become his way of self-soothing. I want our child to feel loved unconditionally, to know that they're enough just as they are. The emotion in his voice made Emily's heart ache with love. They will. We'll make sure of it. That afternoon, they drove to Westchester to look at the house Richard had mentioned. The Sterling country estate sat on 50 acres of rolling hills and mature trees, a Georgian colonial that managed to be both grand and welcoming. As their car wound up the circular drive, Emily caught her breath at the beauty of it. It's been in my family for 3 generations, Richard explained as they walked through rooms filled with sunlight and possibility. My grandmother raised roses in the garden. My mother painted in the sunroom. I always thought I'd sell it someday, but now I can see our children learning to ride in the paddock, having birthday parties under the oak tree, bringing friends home from college. He paused in the doorway of what would become the nursery, sunlight streaming through tall windows. Can you see it? Emily moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. I can see it. They spent the rest of the afternoon wandering the grounds, making plans with the enthusiasm of any young couple expecting their first child. Richard showed her the pond where he'd learned to fish, the treehouse his father had built in a rare moment of paternal attention, the gardens where his mother had spent countless hours, teaching him the names of flowers. She would have loved you, he said as they sat on the stone bench beside her rose garden, now overgrown but still beautiful in its wildness. Tell me about her. Catherine Sterling, named Morrison. Richard smiled at the memory. She was tiny like you, but she had the presence of a woman twice her size. She could quiet a room just by walking into it. Not because she was intimidating, but because she was genuinely interested in everyone she met. Is that where you get it from? The way you can command a conversation without raising your voice? Maybe. Though I learned the business side from my father. Richard's expression grew serious. I want to be a better father than he was, Emily. I want to be present, engaged, available. Not just a provider. Emily leaned against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. You will be. You already are. And the baby isn't even born yet. That evening, back in the city, they called Emily's parents in Connecticut to share the news about the country house. Her mother cried happy tears over the phone. Her father cleared his throat several times and said he was proud of them both. Your parents are good people, Richard observed as Emily hung up. I can see where you get your strength. They're excited about being grandparents. Mom's already talking about teaching the baby to bake her famous chocolate chip cookies. And your father? Emily grinned. He wants to teach them about farming. He's convinced every child should know how to grow their own tomatoes. Richard laughed, and the sound filled their penthouse with warmth. As they settled into bed that night, Emily curled against his side. She felt the future stretching out before them like a golden road. "Richard, I'm happy. Really, truly happy." His arms tightened around her, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." What neither of them knew was that their happiness had not gone unnoticed by those who preferred them miserable, and that sometimes the greatest threats come not from strangers, but from those who believe they know what's best for you. Bundess Elizabeth Chen had been Richard's personal physician for over a decade. But as she looked across her desk at the couple before her, Emily glowing with early pregnancy, Richard hovering protectively at her side, she saw something she'd never witnessed in all their years of acquaintance. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Chen announced, handing Emily the ultrasound photos that would join the collection Richard kept in his wallet. "Baby's development is exactly on track. Heartbeat strong, all measurements normal." "And Emily?" Richard asked, his hand finding his wife automatically. "The morning sickness isn't getting worse?" "Actually, it should start improving soon. Most women find the second trimester much easier." Dr. Chen smiled at Emily's visible relief. "Though I have to say, Mrs. Sterling, you're handling this remarkably well for a first pregnancy. Most of my patients are much more anxious at this stage." Emily glanced at Richard, who'd become her anchor through every wave of nausea, every moment of doubt. "I have excellent support." After their appointment, they walked through Central Park in the crisp October air, Richard carrying the ultrasound photos as if they were precious manuscripts. Emily loved watching him like this, unguarded, openly happy, his usual controlled facade completely abandoned. "We should probably start telling people at work," Richard said as they paused by the reservoir, watching joggers circle the path. "I want to get ahead of any speculation." "Will that be difficult? Managing the business while becoming a father?" Richard considered the question seriously. "I've been thinking about that. I want to be present for this child in ways my father never was. Maybe it's time to delegate more. Trust my team to handle day-to-day operations while I focus on what really matters." Emily felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. What really matters? You, this baby, building something that lasts beyond quarterly profits. Richard stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Emily, I know this pregnancy wasn't planned, but I want you to know there's nowhere else I'd rather be than right here with you." Before Emily could respond, a familiar voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Well, well, the happy couple." They turned to see Vivian Ashworth approaching with two other women Emily recognized from various social functions, Margaret Peaton and Julia Castair, wives of men whose fortunes rivaled Richard's own. "Vivian," Richard said coolly. "Ladies, we couldn't help but notice you coming out of Dr. Chen's building," Vivian continued, her smile sharp as winter frost. "Such a lovely area for a walk, isn't it, girls?" The implication was clear. They'd been watching, waiting, drawing their own conclusions about the visit to one of Manhattan's most exclusive obstetrics practices. "How wonderful for you both," Margaret added, her tone suggesting anything but happiness. "Though I do hope you're not rushing into too many changes too quickly. These early months can be so uncertain." Emily felt Richard's entire body tense. Beside her, a barely controlled energy that reminded her of a predator preparing to strike. But before he could speak, another voice joined the conversation. "Vivian Ashworth, as I live and breathe." The newcomer was a woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed, but carrying herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove anything to anyone. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her blue eyes sharp with intelligence and something that might have been amusement. "Mrs. Blackwood," Vivian stammered, clearly thrown off balance. "How lovely to see you." "I'm sure," the older woman's gaze moved to Richard and Emily saw her expression soften. "You must be Emily Sterling. I'm Catherine Blackwood. Your husband and I have done business together for years." Emily recognized the name immediately. Blackwood Industries was one of the few companies that had never been absorbed by or competed directly with Sterling Industries, mainly because Catherine Blackwood was considered too formidable to challenge. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Blackwood." "Please call me Catherine, and may I say you look absolutely radiant. Pregnancy suits you beautifully." The direct acknowledgement of what everyone had been dancing around sent visible shockwaves through Vivian and her companions. "Now then," Catherine continued, her attention returning to the three women who'd been harassing Emily, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Such interesting theories about timing and planning, though I have to wonder what possible business is it of yours?" The question was delivered with the kind of steel wrapped in silk authority that had made Catherine Blackwood a legend in business circles. Vivian's face went through several interesting color changes. "We were simply offering congratulations." "Were you?" Catherine's eyebrows rose. "How odd. It sounded more like speculation and judgment disguised as concern. But then, I suppose some people have too much time and too little purpose." The dismissal was absolute. Without another word, Vivian and her companions melted away into the crowd of park visitors, their retreat watched by Catherine with satisfied approval. "Vultures," Catherine said once they were gone. "Pay them no mind, my dear. They're simply jealous that you managed to accomplish what they never could." "What's that?" Emily asked. Catherine's smile was warm with genuine affection. "You made Richard Sterling happy. That's no small feat, and it has them absolutely terrified." As they walked away from the encounter, Emily realized she'd found something she hadn't even known she needed. A powerful ally in a world that could be cruel to outsiders, but more importantly, she'd seen once again how fiercely her husband was willing to fight for her, and how their love was becoming something stronger than either of them could have imagined. November brought an early snow to New York, blanketing the city in pristine white that made everything look like a Christmas card. Emily stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, watching the snowflakes dance past the glass, her hand resting on the small but unmistakable curve of her belly. At 4 and 1/2 months, she could no longer hide the pregnancy, nor did she want to. The constant nausea had finally subsided, replaced by an energy and contentment that seemed to glow from within. Richard had become even more protective, if such a thing were possible, hovering without being suffocating, anticipating her needs before she voiced them. "The nursery furniture arrived," Richard announced, entering the room with the enthusiasm of a child on Christmas morning. "Would you like to see it set up?" Emily turned from the window, smiling at the barely contained excitement in her husband's voice. "You set it up when this morning, while you were at your appointment with Dr. Chen, I may have bribed the delivery team to work faster." Richard's grin was boyish, transforming his usually serious features. "Come on, I want to see your reaction." He led her down the hall to what had been his home office, a room he'd transformed completely in the past month. Gone were the masculine leather and dark wood, replaced by something that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. The walls were painted a soft sage green that worked for either gender, with hand-painted murals of forest creatures that seemed to dance around the room. A crib worthy of royalty sat by the window, its white wood gleaming in the afternoon light. "Richard," Emily breathed, her hand finding his. "It's perfect." "There's more." He was practically bouncing on his feet as he showed her the matching changing table, the rocking chair upholstered in cream velvet, the bookshelf already filled with classic children's stories. "And look at this." He opened a music box on the dresser, and a gentle melody filled the room. Brahms's lullaby played on what sounded like tiny silver bells. Emily felt tears prick her eyes at the sweetness of it. "You did all this yourself." "I wanted it to be special. To show—" Richard paused, suddenly uncertain. "To show how much this means to me. How much you both mean to me." Emily stood on her toes to kiss him, tasting snow and promises on his lips. "We love you too." They spent the afternoon arranging baby clothes that had arrived as gifts from well-wishers, marveling over tiny onesies and impossibly small shoes. Richard held up an outfit designed to look like a miniature business suit, complete with a tiny tie. "Absolutely not," Emily laughed. "This baby will learn to crawl before they learn to give presentations." "But think how adorable they'd look at board meetings," Richard protested, his eyes dancing with mischief. "Board meetings? I was thinking about bringing the baby to the office sometimes. There's no reason being a father should mean being absent. Richard's expression grew serious. I want to be present for everything, Emily. First steps, first words, bedtime stories, little league games, all of it. The conviction in his voice made Emily's heart skip. Even diaper changes at 3 a.m.? Especially those. Richard pulled her into his arms, his hands spanning her rounded belly. I love you, Emily Sterling, both of you. As if responding to his father's voice, the baby chose that moment to move, a flutter that had become stronger and more frequent in recent weeks. Richard's eyes widened in wonder. Was that your child saying hello? Emily confirmed, watching Richard's face transform with awe. He knelt beside the rocking chair where Emily sat, his hands gentle on her belly, waiting for another movement. When it came, a definite kick. Against his palm. Richard's smile was brilliant. Hello there, little one, he whispered. This is your daddy. I can't wait to meet you. Emily threaded her fingers through his dark hair, watching the man who commanded corporate empires speak to their unborn child with infinite tenderness. This was the Richard Sterling no one else ever saw. The man behind the carefully constructed public persona, vulnerable and open and completely hers. Have you thought about names? Richard asked, settling on the floor beside her chair. A few. What about you? If it's a girl, maybe Catherine. After my mother. Richard looked up at her hopefully. And if it's a boy, Michael, Emily finished. After my grandfather, the one who taught me that strength comes from kindness, not power. Michael Sterling. Richard tested the name, smiling. I like it. Strong but not harsh. Classic but not stuffy. As evening fell over the city, they remained in the nursery, talking about the future with the easy intimacy of longtime lovers. They discussed schools and values, traditions they wanted to keep and ones they wanted to abandon, the kind of world they hoped to create for their child. Sometimes I can't believe this is real, Emily murmured as Richard helped her to her feet. 6 months ago, I was just Emily Morrison from Connecticut, worried about saving my family's farm. Now you're Emily Sterling, Richard finished, creating a family of your own. And you're still the same strong, compassionate woman who caught my attention in the first place. As they left the nursery hand in hand, neither could have imagined that their peaceful bubble was about to be shattered by news that would test everything they'd built together. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early December, piercing through the comfortable routine Emily and Richard had established. Emily was reading in the sunroom, her feet propped up on an ottoman while Richard handled business calls from his home office when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Hello, Emily. This is Catherine Blackwood. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. Emily sat up straighter, recognizing the voice of the woman who defended her against Vivian Ashworth in Central Park. Of course not, Mrs. Blackwood. How are you? I'm well, dear, but I'm calling because there's something you and Richard need to know. Could you both meet me for lunch today? It's rather urgent. The serious tone in Catherine's voice sent a chill down Emily's spine. Is everything all right? It will be once we address it properly. Can you meet me at Lerna down at 1? And Emily, don't worry too much. Some problems are easier to solve than they appear. After Emily hung up, she found Richard in his study, ending a call with someone in London. The concern on her face immediately captured his attention. What's wrong? Catherine Blackwood wants to meet with us for lunch. She says there's something we need to know. Richard's expression grew grave. Catherine Blackwood didn't issue urgent lunch invitations without cause, and her network of information rivaled the CIA's in both scope and accuracy. Lerna was nearly empty during the lunch hour on a Tuesday, affording them privacy in a corner table overlooking the city. Catherine arrived exactly on time, her silver hair immaculate, her expression serious but not unkind. Thank you for coming, she said after they'd ordered. I'll get straight to the point. Vivian Ashworth and her little circle have been busy spreading rumors about your marriage and pregnancy. Emily felt her blood turn cold. What kind of rumors? The predictable kind, that you trapped Richard with a calculated pregnancy, that the marriage is a sham, that Richard is being manipulated by a gold digger half his age. Catherine's voice was matter of fact, as if she were discussing the weather. Complete nonsense, of course, but the sort of thing that can gain traction if left unchecked. Richard's jaw tightened. How far has this spread? Not as far as they'd hoped. Most people with sense recognize jealousy when they see it, but there's been some chatter at the club, some speculation in certain social circles, nothing that can't be managed. Emily felt sick, and not from morning sickness. Why are they doing this? Because you represent everything they fear, Catherine said gently. You're young, beautiful, genuinely happy, and married to one of the most eligible men in their social circle. More than that, you've achieved something they never could. You've made Richard Sterling vulnerable again, human again. That terrifies women who've built their identities around being untouchable ice queens. What can we do? Richard asked, his hand finding Emily's under the table. Catherine smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. We remind them why it's unwise to cross someone with more power and better connections than they have. I've already had conversations with their husbands about reining in their wives' tongues. Amazing how quickly gossip stops when major business deals hang in the balance. Emily stared at the older woman with a mixture of gratitude and awe. You did that for us? My dear child, I've been watching Richard Sterling build walls around himself for 15 years. When I saw those walls come down because of you, I decided you were worth protecting. Catherine reached across the table to squeeze Emily's hand. Besides, I know a real love story when I see one. They're rare enough in our world to be treasured. As they prepared to leave lunch, Catherine had one final piece of advice. Don't let them drive you into hiding. Continue being yourselves, happy in love, excited about your future. The best response to gossip is visible contentment. That evening, Emily stood in their bedroom while Richard helped her into a midnight blue evening gown for yet another charity function. Her growing belly created a beautiful silhouette under the silk, impossible to hide and glorious to behold. Are you sure you want to do this? Richard asked, his hands gentle on her shoulders. We could skip tonight. Stay home. No. Emily's voice was firm with new resolve. Catherine is right. We have nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. Let them gossip. Let them stare. We know the truth. Richard turned her in his arms, his gray eyes full of admiration. Have I mentioned lately that I'm married to the strongest woman in New York? Show me, Emily whispered, standing on her toes to kiss him. As Richard deepened the kiss, his hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness, Emily felt her courage return. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. The battle lines had been drawn, but neither Richard nor Emily realized that their greatest test wouldn't come from external enemies, but from the unexpected arrival of someone from Richard's past, who threatened to undo everything they'd built. The knock at their penthouse door came on a snowy Friday evening in late December, just as Emily and Richard were settling in for a quiet night. They'd planned to decorate their Christmas tree, a tradition Emily had insisted on despite Richard's claims that he hadn't celebrated Christmas properly in years. Expecting someone? Emily asked, noting the tension that immediately appeared in Richard's shoulders. No. Richard's voice was carefully controlled as he moved toward the intercom. Security should have called up. The voice that came through the speaker made Emily's blood freeze. Hello, Richard. It's Victoria. I think we need to talk. Emily watched her husband's face transform, all color draining away as if he'd seen a ghost. In many ways, he had. Victoria Ashford, his ex-wife, the woman whose betrayal had taught him not to trust, not to love, not to hope for anything real. Richard? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. He turned to her, his gray eyes filled with something that looked like panic. I'll send her away. She has no right to be here. But even as he spoke, Emily could see the old wounds opening, the carefully healed scars beginning to bleed again. Victoria's timing wasn't coincidental. She'd heard about the pregnancy, about Richard's happiness, and she'd come to poison it. Let her up, Emily said quietly. What? Emily moved closer to her husband, placing her hands on his chest where she could feel his heart racing. Let her up, Richard. Whatever she wants, whatever game she's playing, it's better to face it now than to let it fester. Richard studied her face, searching for any sign of doubt or fear. Emily knew he found neither. She'd learned to be strong for both of them when necessary. Are you sure? I'm sure. Emily stood on her toes to kiss him softly. I'm not going anywhere, Richard. Whatever she says, whatever she tries to do, I'm not going anywhere. 5 minutes later, Victoria Ashford stood in their living room like a beautiful plague. She was exactly what Emily had expected. Tall, elegant, perfectly maintained, with the kind of cold beauty that photographed well, but left no warmth in its wake. Her dark hair was styled in a chignon that probably cost more than Emily's wedding dress, and her designer coat probably cost more than most people's cars. Victoria, Richard's voice was arctic. What do you want? Hello to you too, darling. Victoria's smile was razor sharp as her gaze moved from Richard to Emily. And you must be the famous Mrs. Sterling. My, you are young, aren't you? Emily felt the insult like a slap but refused to react. Miss Ashford, what brings you to New York? Oh, just business. Though I couldn't resist the opportunity to congratulate Richard on his marriage. Victoria's tone suggested the word left a bad taste in her mouth. Taste in her mouth and the baby, of course. How wonderfully convenient that must have been. Richard stepped forward, his entire body radiating threat. You have exactly 30 seconds to state your business before I have security remove you. Victoria laughed, and the sound was like broken glass. Always so dramatic, Richard. I'm simply here to offer some friendly advice to your little wife. I don't need advice from you, Emily said calmly. Oh, but you do. Victoria moved closer, circling Emily like a predator studying prey. You see, my dear, you think you've won some great prize, but you don't really know Richard at all. You think he's changed, that he's capable of love, that this time will be different. Emily felt ice forming in her chest, but kept her voice steady. Get to the point. The point is that Richard Sterling is incapable of real intimacy. Oh, he'll perform the part for a while. The devoted husband, the doting father-to-be, but eventually his true nature will surface. The coldness, the suspicion, the inability to trust. He'll start questioning your motives, your loyalty, your love. He'll dissect every conversation, every gesture, looking for signs of betrayal until he finds them, whether they exist or not. Each word was a carefully aimed dart designed to poison and destroy. Emily saw Richard flinch as if physically struck, saw the doubt beginning to creep into his expression. That's enough, Richard said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Is it? Victoria turned her attention back to him. Tell her about the private investigators, Richard. Tell her about the background checks you ran before your wedding. Tell her about the prenup her father signed without her knowledge. Emily felt the world tilt on its axis. What? Victoria's smile was triumphant. Oh, she doesn't know. How deliciously naive, Richard. Surely you've told your sweet little wife about all the precautions you took to protect yourself, the financial safeguards, the legal protections, the careful documentation of every aspect of your courtship. Emily turned to stare at her husband, seeing guilt written across his features. Richard, is that true? The silence stretched between them like a chasm, and Emily felt her heart begin to break. Not because of the prenup. She didn't care about his money, but because of what it represented, that even now, even after everything they'd shared, part of him still didn't trust her. Emily, I can explain. Can you? Victoria's voice was silk wrapped in poison. Can you explain why a man truly in love would need a private investigator to verify his wife's virginity? Can you explain why someone who trusts completely would require legal documents guaranteeing financial protection? Can you explain why— Stop! Emily's voice cut through Victoria's monologue like a blade. Just stop. She looked between the two of them. Richard, pale and stricken. Victoria, beautiful and venomous, and made a choice that surprised them both. Thank you, she said to Victoria. I'm sorry. Emily smiled, and there was steel in it. Thank you for showing me exactly what I'm not. Richard, walk her out. Now, as the door closed behind Victoria, Emily and Richard stood facing each other across their living room, the Christmas tree blinking cheerfully in the corner, while their world seemed to crumble around them. Emily, please let me explain. Emily placed her hands on her belly where their child grew and looked at the man she thought she knew completely. Explain what, Richard? That you never really trusted me? That while I was falling in love with you, you were having me investigated like a common criminal? The pain in her voice broke something in Richard's chest, as he struggled to find words that could bridge the chasm Victoria had torn between them. Neither Emily nor Richard realized that their greatest test had only just begun. The silence in their penthouse stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Emily stood by the Christmas tree, its lights casting multicolored shadows across her face, while Richard remained frozen by the door, his usual commanding presence diminished to that of a man facing judgment. The investigators were hired before I met you, Richard said finally, his voice raw with desperation. Before I knew who you were, what you were. It was standard procedure, Emily, something my lawyers insisted on. After Victoria, Emily turned to face him fully, and the pain in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. Before you met me. But what about after? What about after our wedding night? After you said you were beginning to trust me? What about after you told me you loved me? Richard's throat worked as he struggled to form words. I called them off. The investigation stopped the morning after the storm. But you didn't tell me about the prenup. The accusation hung between them like a sword. Richard moved closer, his hands extended as if approaching a wounded animal. Emily, the prenup was my father's demand, signed before our engagement was even public. I haven't looked at it since our wedding day. Haven't thought about it because it doesn't matter. Nothing in it matters compared to what we have. Doesn't matter? Emily's voice rose, her composure finally cracking. It matters to me, Richard. While I was worried that you might think I was a gold digger, you'd already legally ensured I couldn't be one. While I was falling in love with you, you were protecting yourself from me. Tears began to fall down her cheeks, and Richard felt each one like a physical blow. Emily, please. No. She stepped back as he reached for her. Don't you see what she did? She came here tonight to destroy us, to prove that you'll never really trust anyone, and in 5 minutes she succeeded completely. Richard felt panic clawing at his chest. She didn't succeed. What we have is real, Emily. What I feel for you is real. Is it? Emily's voice broke on the words. Or is it just another performance? Another carefully controlled arrangement where you hold all the power, and I'm just grateful to be here. How can you even ask that? Richard's own composure finally shattered. After everything we've shared, everything we've built together, Emily, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You've changed me, healed me, made me believe in things I thought were lost forever. But you still don't trust me. The simple statement stopped Richard cold because he couldn't immediately deny it. Some part of him, the part Victoria had poisoned years ago, did still hold back, did still protect itself, did still wait for the other shoe to drop. Emily saw the truth in his hesitation, and her face crumpled with fresh pain. She was right. You'll never really be able to let go, will you? There will always be that voice in your head wondering if I'm real. If this is real, if I'm just a better actress than she was. Emily, I'm trying. I know you are. Her voice grew quiet, defeated. But trying isn't enough, Richard. Not for a marriage. Not for the child we're bringing into this world. I can't spend the rest of my life proving I'm not her. I can't raise our baby in a house where love comes with conditions and legal protections. Richard felt the ground disappearing beneath his feet. What are you saying? Emily walked to the window, looking out at the city lights through glass blurred by her tears. I'm saying that maybe Victoria was right about one thing. Maybe you're not capable of the kind of trust that makes a real marriage work. Don't say that. Richard's voice was barely a whisper. Please don't say that. Then prove me wrong. Emily turned back to face him, and Richard saw something new in her expression. Not just hurt, but a strength he'd somehow missed before. Show me that I matter more than your fear. Show me that our child matters more than protecting yourself. How? Tell me how, and I'll do it. Emily placed her hands on her belly where their child grew, and Richard saw her gathering courage for what came next. The prenup, tear it up. Richard's face went white. Emily, not because I want your money, not because I care about any of those legal protections, but because keeping it means there's still a part of you that sees me as a potential threat rather than your wife. Emily's voice grew stronger with each word. Tear it up because you trust me. Tear it up because you believe in us. Tear it up because love is supposed to be a leap of faith, not a calculated risk. Richard stared at her, his mind racing through years of careful self-protection, through lawyers' warnings and business advisors' cautions, through the bitter lessons Victoria had taught him about the cost of vulnerability. And then he thought about Emily on their wedding night, trembling with innocence and trust. He thought about her excitement over baby clothes, her joy at each ultrasound, her fierce protection of their happiness against society's judgment. He thought about waking up beside her each morning and seeing love, real, uncomplicated, unconditional love in her eyes. Okay, he said simply. Emily blinked as if she hadn't expected him to agree so readily. Okay. Richard moved to his desk, pulling out his phone. Marcus, yes, I know it's late. I need you to prepare paperwork dissolving the prenuptial agreement between Emily and myself. Yes, immediately. No, I don't need to think about it because my wife asked me to, and that's reason enough. As he hung up, Emily stared at him with something that might have been wonder. Just like that, Emily. I should have torn up that document months ago. I should have told you about the investigation, about all the barriers I put up to protect myself. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I almost lost the only thing that actually matters. Emily searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or reservation. She found none, only love, pure and uncomplicated, and finally truly free. "What changed your mind?" she whispered. Richard's smile was soft, vulnerable, completely unguarded. "You did. Just now, watching you walk away rather than settle for less than you deserve. Emily, you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Braver than I've ever been. You were willing to leave me rather than live with my fear. And that's when I realized, you're not Victoria. You're not even close. You're the woman who saved me from becoming everything I hated about myself." Emily felt her heart expand with love so complete it took her breath away. "Richard, I love you," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. Not carefully, not conditionally, not with legal safeguards and escape clauses. "I love you the way you deserve to be loved, completely, trustingly, with everything I have to give. And I'm sorry it took me so long to show you that." As Emily stepped into her husband's arms, feeling his love surround her like warmth, she knew they'd turned a corner that would change everything. The old Richard Sterling, controlled, protected, afraid, was gone forever. In his place stood a man ready to leap into love without a safety net, ready to trust completely, ready to build a life based on faith rather than fear. And as their lips met in a kiss that tasted like new beginnings, both Emily and Richard knew that their real love story was finally about to begin. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Westchester estate, painting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors, where 4-year-old Michael Sterling was building an elaborate castle with his blocks. His dark hair caught the light the same way his father's did, but his eyes, those were pure Emily, warm brown and full of mischief. "Daddy, look!" Michael called out as Richard entered the breakfast room, already dressed for a day that would end by 3 instead of the 7 or 8 that used to be his norm. "It's a castle for princes and princesses. It's magnificent," Richard said solemnly, kneeling to examine his son's architectural masterpiece. "Does it have a moat?" "Mommy says moats are silly," Michael announced with 4-year-old authority. "She says the best castles have gardens." Richard glanced up to find Emily in the doorway, her hair caught in a messy bun, wearing one of his old Columbia t-shirts over leggings, looking more beautiful than any woman had a right to at 7 in the morning. "Your mother is very wise," Richard agreed, standing to wrap his arms around his wife. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling." "Good morning, Mr. Sterling." Emily leaned into his embrace, still marveling after all these years at how perfectly she fit against him. "Sleep well? Better than I have in years." It was true. The nightmares that had plagued Richard for months after Victoria's visit had finally faded completely, replaced by dreams of the future he was building with Emily and Michael. After breakfast, Richard found himself in his home study, a room that bore no resemblance to the fortress he'd once constructed around himself in the Hamptons. This space was warm, lived in, filled with family photos and Michael's artwork alongside business documents. The walls were lined with pictures. Their wedding day, Emily's pregnancy portraits, Michael's first steps, family vacations to places Richard had never thought to visit before he learned to see the world through Emily's eyes. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Emily entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the smile that still made his heart skip beats. "Thought you might need this before your call with Tokyo." "Thank you." Richard accepted the coffee, pulling Emily down onto his lap in the process. "Has Michael decided what he wants for his birthday?" "A pony." Emily's grin was pure mischief. "He's very specific. It has to be white with a brown spot on its forehead, and it has to know how to jump." Richard groaned theatrically. "Your father's been telling him stories about the horses on the farm again, hasn't he?" "Among other things. Dad also mentioned that 4-year-olds are old enough to learn about responsibility and the value of hard work." Emily traced lazy circles on Richard's chest. "I think he wants to turn our son into a farmer. There are worse fates." Richard caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Though I draw the line at chickens." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching through the window as Michael played in the garden with the golden retriever they'd adopted 6 months ago, another of Emily's ideas that had transformed their lives in ways Richard couldn't have imagined. "I have news," Emily said eventually, her voice carrying a note that made Richard pay attention immediately. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, I think, I hope." Emily took a deep breath. "Richard, I'm pregnant." The words hit Richard like lightning. Electric, transformative, and completely wonderful. "You're about 6 weeks, according to Dr. Chen." Emily watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of the panic or doubt that might have been there 5 years ago. She found none, only joy, pure and uncomplicated and absolutely radiant. Emily. Richard's voice was rough with emotion as he pulled her closer. Are you happy? Are you okay? How are you feeling? I'm perfect. We're perfect. Emily kissed him softly, a little scared maybe. Michael's going to be quite the big brother. Richard's laugh was rich with delight. He'll be wonderful. He's already so protective of you, so gentle with smaller children. Richard's hands found Emily's still flat stomach. Hello there, little one. Your big brother can't wait to meet you. As if summoned by their conversation, Michael appeared in the doorway, his face serious with 4-year-old importance. Mommy, Daddy, I have something to tell you. Emily and Richard exchanged amused glances. What is it, sweetheart? Michael climbed onto Richard's other knee, making them a complete family circle. Mrs. Patterson next door says you're going to have another baby. Is that true? Emily blinked in surprise. Mrs. Patterson said what? She saw you at Dr. Chen's office yesterday, Michael explained matter-of-factly. She told Daddy Jim that she thinks you might be having another baby like when you had me. Richard shook his head in amazement. Remind me why we live in a small town again. Because you love it, Emily said, laughing. Because you love the community, the neighbors who care enough to notice things, the sense of belonging to something larger than ourselves. She was right, of course. The man who had once valued privacy above all else now found comfort in being part of a community that celebrated births and birthdays, that showed up with casseroles when someone was sick, that watched out for each other's children as if they were their own. So is it true? Michael persisted. Are you having another baby? Emily looked at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, sweetheart. You're going to be a big brother. Michael's face lit up with excitement. Can I teach them things like how to build castles and how to be nice to Duke? Duke was the golden retriever, named by Michael after what he claimed was the most important dog name ever. You can teach them lots of things, Richard assured him. Being a big brother is a very important job. I'll be the best big brother ever, Michael announced with absolute confidence. Just like Daddy is the best daddy ever, and Mommy is the best mommy ever. Later that evening, after Michael had been tucked into bed with stories, and songs and promises that the new baby wouldn't arrive for many months yet, Emily and Richard stood on their terrace overlooking the gardens. The stars were brilliant above them, unmarred by city lights, and the air carried the scent of roses and possibility. Do you ever think about how we started? Emily asked, her head on Richard's shoulder. That nervous girl in the Hampton suite who didn't know what she was getting into? I think about how close I came to missing all of this, Richard replied, his arms tightening around her. How my fear almost cost me everything that matters. But it didn't. Emily tilted her face up to look at him. We found our way to each other. Richard, all the mistakes and misunderstandings and moments of doubt. We found our way to this. Richard studied his wife's face in the starlight, older now than the girl he'd married, marked by motherhood and maturity, and the kind of deep contentment that came from being truly loved. She was more beautiful now than she'd been on their wedding day, more precious than any treasure he'd accumulated in years of building his empire. I love you, Emily Sterling, he said simply. More today than yesterday, less than I will tomorrow. And I love you, she replied. The man you've become, the father you are, the husband who learned that the greatest risk is not taking any risks at all. As they stood together under the vast sky, surrounded by the life they'd built, and the love they'd chosen every day for 5 years, Richard reflected on the words Emily had spoken in that darkened room during the storm that had changed everything. Love isn't about control, it's about trust. He'd learned the truth of those words through years of choosing faith over fear, through building a life based on hope rather than protection, through discovering that the greatest strength came, not from walls, but from the courage to be vulnerable with the right person. Their love story had begun with a business arrangement and bloomed into something neither of them could have imagined. A partnership built on respect, a passion that deepened with time, a family that grew from love freely given and completely trusted. As Emily laughed at something Michael had left scattered on the terrace, blocks spelling out "I love Mommy and Daddy" in wobbly 4-year-old letters, Richard knew that some stories don't end. They simply continue growing richer and deeper with each passing year. What are you thinking about? Emily asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "Forever," Richard said simply. "And how it's not nearly long enough?" Emily smiled, the expression radiant with love and promise, and the unshakable certainty that they had found something rare and precious and worth protecting with everything they had. "Then we'll have to make the most of the time we have," she whispered, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted like starlight and promises, and all the tomorrows yet to come. In the distance, the estate settled into peaceful quiet. The gardens rustled with night breezes, and inside the house, their son slept soundly, dreaming of ponies and castles and the baby brother or sister who would soon join their perfect family. Some love stories are written in grand gestures and dramatic moments. Others are built quietly, day by day, in small choices and daily kindnesses, and the gradual construction of a life that feels like home. Richard and Emily Sterling had found both. The dramatic passion that had brought them together, and the quiet, steady love that would carry them through all the years to come. Their story was complete, but their life together was just beginning. And every sunrise brought new possibilities for love, growth, and the kind of happiness that comes from two souls who have chosen each other completely without reservation, without fear, and without end.